So the whole premise of this build was around this whole Racer X canopy pod that's meant specifically for the Caddx Vista. And I wanted to have a small drone with the Caddx Vista because it would be good as a measuring stick for how bad or how far I can take my bigger cinema drones, which use the DJI Air unit, which has a bit better range. So as long as this can make it out there, then I'm safe with the big drone. So this pod is specifically designed for the Caddx Vista. It has mounts which fit the Betaflight X-Night frame as far as the spacing is concerned. And then it has a built-in, cavity for the Caddx Vista unit. And let's talk about the frame versus the pod situation. So I used a frame that's not specifically meant for this pod. The spacing does match up. I forgot what it is, but the X-Night will fit as far as the spacing. But the X-Night has 2mm holes on these carbon fiber tabs, which are meant for, the regular Beta FPV canopy. So all you have to do is drill out the 2mm holes for 3mm holes. Do that very carefully in increments of like a quarter or a half of a millimeter with your drill, and make sure it's backed up against a piece of wood as you're drilling it. And then you can use M3 hardware to mount the pod. And I just used a steel screw with a plastic spacer and a plastic nut. Now, as far as mounting the Caddx Vista in there, if you get this pod, you'll be confused at first as to how to actually secure the Caddx Vista within it, because it sits right above the flight controller all-in-one unit, but it doesn't touch it. It doesn't rest on top of it. The way they do it is, you probably won't see this, but directly in line here, there's actually a TPU boss. If you don't know what that word is, just look it up. It's an engineering term. So it's like a little cylinder and of TPU print. And if you get an M2 20mm screw, you can use the 20x20 mounting holes that come within the Vista, and you use 2 screws, one on either side here, and you can screw it directly into the TPU. I found it difficult to do it as is because the hole is already very, very small. So it helps to take an M2 drill and re-drill those bosses out so that you can actually find the hole as you're securing the Vista unit into the pod. And once you get that sorted out, you can leave the wires pretty long, and they all bunch up in there, and it provides for a very clean build. As for the rest of the specs, I'm using the JHE MCU all-in-one board, the one that Kebab FPV recommends, and so far no problems there. I'm running it on 3S because it's most mimics the way my Beast class cinema rigs fly. If I did 4S, that would just be too much power and it would throw off my game. And I'm using 1404 what is it called? Flywoo NIN. What is it? Yeah, 1404 motors. And I tried at first using the Gemfan 4-inch Hurricane props, but those were too much prop for these motors because I noticed I get some bobbling. With these smaller HQ 4-inch bi-blades, it's just the right amount of prop. If I were to build this over again, I'd probably use the Beta FPV 1505 motors and put on heavier props. But since these are the only motors I had laying around, I had to use smaller props, which is fine because this thing is a blast to fly. Not only does it serve as a scout, but it also kind of mimics what my Beast class flies like with the same rates, and it's also really fun just to fly around. And it weighs only 215 grams with these with these 3S GNB 11100 batteries. These are great. The only downside is I would use them only for smaller Toothpick builds because their C rating is not very good at all. If you punch out, you'll definitely puff it for sure. I used it on a 5-inch ultralight, and that's why these are already puffed. But they work pretty well, and they have amazing capacity. I'm getting about a 6 to 7 minute flight time with this one. If I go really aggressive, it's more like 5 minutes. So the way I tune my drones is I use Stinger Swarms method, where you set your D gains and I gains to 0, and then you set very low P gains, and then you set yaw settings to something that you think will work about, just to make it not go crazy. And then once you get your P up to the point where it starts oscillating but not out of control, then you can start increasing your D gains to where those oscillations are fully damped, are critically damped. And then once that's done, then I set my I term. I bump up my I term a little bit until the point where the quad doesn't drift when I'm doing throttle blips. And that's how I tuned this drone. Now that worked, but the problem was I still found oscillations in the FPV feed when I was flying it under the goggles. So I ended up just giving it more D term and checking to make sure that the motors weren't hot and everything was fine. So that was the process I used for this drone, and I can flash my PIDs up on the screen there so you can see. But I love how it flies. It handles prop wash pretty well, especially for a smaller drone, and I can do all the acrobatic stuff that I can do with a Beast class or 5-inch. Just, it's missing that power. It feels more floaty, but I use it to broaden my creativity as far as my flying style and to just brush up on my skills.